My name is Lynn Cummings. I'm the daughter of Frank Tarbutton. My dad, Frank Tarbutton, was born in September of 2000. Was born in September 16th, 1921. He was in the U.S. Army, the 76th Division. He was eventually a captain in the Army. My dad served in World War II, and then when I was less than a month old, he was recalled into service and served in the Korean War. My father did not choose to serve in the military, as did many of the people who were in the military at the time. It was required that all young men, unless they had an exemption, serve in the military. So that's why he went to two wars that would probably not have been his choice to do. My dad served, I believe, for 3 years in World War II in Europe. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. My dad actually was very lucky when he was recalled into the service during the Korean War. He was sent to Bowling Green, Kentucky to teach ROTC at Western Kentucky University. Well, my dad had a lot more stories about World War II than he did the Korean War. I can remember one of the stories that he talked about, his first Christmas away from home. He was with a group of men in England, and they had to take over the household of a wealthy family who lived in a rather big house. And so the family had to move to the attic, and the US Army soldiers took over the rest of the house. And he talked about how they didn't have any Christmas decorations. So one of the men in his unit found some rolls of wallpaper in the attic, and he turned the rolls of wallpaper over and did these beautiful paintings of, one was Santa Claus, and it had the house that they were living in, and then some English phrases that were very meaningful to the men. And we still have those framed as pieces of art in our home. He also talked about one day that he had the flu, and he was supposed to go out and find food and provisions for the men in his unit, and he wasn't able to do that because he had the flu. So his superior officer told him he needed to stay and take care of himself that day. The man who went in my dad's place was shot and killed that day. That was a pretty awful story for him to relate. He talked about how he would never ask his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And one day there was a large barrel that was in the road, and it was in the way of vehicles coming into a camp where he was, I believe in Germany or France. So he asked this man to move the barrel, and the man went over to the barrel and he threw up, and he said he couldn't move it. And my dad came over, and instead of yelling at him for not moving it, he said, "Well, I don't know why you can't move the barrel." And as he got near, there was a dead calf inside, and it smelled so bad that's why the man was refusing to move it and had gotten sick. So my dad and the other man moved the barrel out of the way. He also talked about his first day in Buchenwald, which was the day after that camp was liberated. Buchenwald was out in the country. It was a concentration camp up on a hill with a small town about a mile or two away. And when he and the Americans rolled into Buchenwald the day after liberation, he said he remembered seeing a whole ditch just filled with dead bodies of people that the German soldiers, the Nazi soldiers, had killed before the liberators could get into the camp. They tried to kill as many people as they could, and some of these people had survived the concentration camp for many years, and then they were just wiped out, hundreds of bodies. I remember as a little kid asking my dad, "Well, if you were in the war, did you ever shoot anyone?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, do you think you shot any adults or any children?" And he said, "I don't know. I might have shot someone one time. I was going through a German town. I had found a motorcycle, and I'd always wanted a motorcycle, and I took this motorcycle from a house, or it was lying by the road or something. So he took this motorcycle, and he was riding back to his camp on this new motorcycle that he had, and his intention was that he was going to take it apart and ship it home one piece at a time. As he was riding through this town that appeared to be abandoned, all of a sudden shots were coming from all over the place. People were shooting at him. trying to kill him, he was able to get back to the camp. And he said after that he abandoned the motorcycle because he decided it was a little too dangerous. And my mother also didn't want him shipping the motorcycle home. Yep, so my dad returned fire and didn't know whether he had shot anyone or not. All he knew was he got out of there alive, and he might have hit someone and he might not have. Another story that my dad used to tell me about before he was sent overseas in World War II, he was stationed at Camp McCoy in far northwestern Wisconsin. It was extremely cold, and his job and the other men's job was to test equipment for the mountaineering divisions who were going to be sent overseas and would be in the mountains in cold weather. So my dad had this philosophy about life once he was out of the Army, was that he was never going to walk anywhere that he didn't have to, and he was going to never hike anywhere that he didn't have to, and he was never going to camp out again because he had done so much of that during the war, and especially when he was at Camp McCoy. They were testing sleeping bags and other sorts of down clothing, tents, and other kinds of things in 40 below zero weather. So once my dad was home from the war, he said, no more camping, no hiking, no walking. I'm getting the closest parking spot I can get to wherever I need to go. Well, I think we should give our veterans a lot of respect. It's very difficult both for people to be away from home if they're stationed far away from home, especially during wartime. It's a real dedication of the entire family. It affects everyone, even generations later. It has a lot of effect on children and spouses and parents and eventually grandchildren, I think, even. Well, I think it's really important what the students here at South Burlington High School are doing. I think capturing the stories from the veterans themselves is probably the best way of being able to carry on the history of what actually happened. And when the veterans are no longer with us, their stories are gone unless they have passed those stories on to their children, such as me, their grandchildren, or other people who are close to them. So I think we should not forget the sacrifices that the veterans and their families have made to our country.